He wasn't supposed to find anyone out there. Not at this hour. Not in a place where even the wind seemed to forget how to breathe, but something was moving in the dark, something low to the ground, dragging itself inch by inch toward him as if guided by the last fragile thread of hope left in this world. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes stood still, boots pressed into the damp earth. The faint hum of distant highway, noise miles away, swallowed by the open stretch of abandoned training land. And for a moment he thought it was just his mind playing tricks again, the kind that came in the quiet after service, when silence got too loud and memories filled the gaps. But then he saw it again, a shift in the shadows, a shape breaking the stillness with a slow, deliberate struggle. The air carried the scent of wet soil and cold metal, and somewhere far off a loose sheet of tin tapped softly in the breeze like a broken metronome. Steady, patient, indifferent, Daniel adjusted his grip on the flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness, catching on something that shouldn't have been there, a faint line across the ground, uneven, interrupted, like something had been pulled rather than walked, and he followed it without thinking, each step slower than the last, his breath measured, controlled, the way it had always been when something didn't feel right. Then it moved again, closer now, just at the edge of the light, and Daniel felt it before he fully saw it, that quiet shift in the air, the presence of something alive, something holding on. The shape emerged gradually, not with sound or sudden motion, but with effort, the kind that spoke of exhaustion without needing a voice. And when the beam finally settled, it revealed a German shepherd, its coat darkened by dirt and time, its body low against the ground as it pulled itself forward with quiet determination, each movement small but purposeful, not wandering, not lost, but directed. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't show fear. Instead, it lifted its head just enough for its eyes to catch the light, amber and steady, locked onto Daniel, as if he had been expected all along. And there was something in that gaze that stopped him cold. Not urgency, not panic, but trust, raw and immediate, like a silent agreement already made. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something else, something heavier, more familiar, and he lowered himself just slightly, not close enough to startle, just enough to meet the moment halfway. The dog moved again, closing the final distance, dragging itself those last few feet until it reached him, and with what little strength it had left, it rested its head gently against the toe of his boot, as if to say the journey was over now, as if to say it had found what it came for. The world seemed to pause in that instant, the wind quiet, the distant sounds fading, leaving only the soft rhythm of breath between them, one steady, one fading, and Daniel felt something shift inside his chest, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time, not since the last time he had knelt beside a partner who trusted him the same way, without question, without hesitation. He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the dog, and for a moment he didn't see a stray, didn't see an accident or coincidence. He saw a choice, a crossing of paths that didn't happen by chance, and as he slowly reached down, careful, deliberate, he understood one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't just a meeting in the dark. This was a moment that was going to change both of them, whether either of them was ready or not. Daniel did not move right away, not because he did not know what to do, but because something about the moment demanded stillness, the kind that let truth rise to the surface without being forced. The dog's head rested against his boot, warm but fading, and he could feel the faint rhythm of breath, shallow and uneven, brushing against the leather as if each exhale carried a question, and Daniel answered the only way he knew how, by lowering himself slowly onto one knee, careful, deliberate, his movement steady so the animal would not feel threatened. "It is all right," he said under his breath, voice low, the kind of tone he had used years ago in places where fear traveled faster than sound, and the dog responded not with movement, but with a subtle shift, its ears twitching just slightly as if it recognized something in that voice, something familiar enough to trust. Daniel set the flashlight down at an angle so the beam would not hit the dog's eyes directly, casting a softer glow over the scene, and for the first time he could see more than just the shape. He could see the details, the coat once strong now dulled by dust, the muscles lean beneath the fur, the kind built for endurance, not wandering, and there was, just beneath the collar line, a worn strip of fabric barely holding on. The faint outline of where a tag had once been attached. Daniel's jaw tightened, not in alarm, but in recognition, because this was no stray that had lost its way. This was a dog that had once belonged somewhere, trained, disciplined, part of something larger than itself. He reached out, hesitating just inches above the dog's neck before making contact, letting his hand rest gently against the fur, and the reaction was immediate but quiet. The dog leaned into the touch, not with strength, but with surrender, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment to let go of whatever had kept it moving this far. "You made it," Daniel whispered, though he did not know where from, only that the journey had not been short, not for a body this tired, not for a will that had pushed beyond its limit. He slid his hand carefully along the dog's side, assessing without rushing, feeling the rise and fall of breath, counting without thinking, 1, 2, pause, then again. And each pause stretched just long enough to make him wonder if the next breath would come. The night air pressed in around them, cooler now, the ground damp, seeping through the fabric of his knee. But Daniel did not shift, did not break contact, because something in him understood that this was the line between holding on and letting go, and he had stood on that line before. A memory flickered, not sharp, not overwhelming, but present, a different night, a different partner. The same quiet plea in a pair of eyes that had trusted him to do the impossible, and Daniel blinked it away. Bringing himself back to the present, to this dog, to this moment, he glanced down again at the worn collar, brushing away a bit of dirt with his thumb until something caught the light, a small piece of metal still attached by a thread of fabric, scratched, faded, but there, and as he tilted it just slightly, the engraving surfaced in fragments, enough to form meaning, enough to stop his breath for half a second. Unit 7. He murmured, the words barely audible, followed by a second line, worn but unmistakable, fallen, and the weight of it settled quietly between them. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy in the way truth always is when it arrives without warning. Daniel exhaled slowly, his hand returning to the dog's neck, firmer now, grounding both of them, and he looked into those amber eyes again, seeing not just exhaustion, but something deeper, something that had carried this animal across distance and time to reach him. And he did not question it, did not try to make sense of how or why, because out here in the quiet, some things did not need explanation, only response. "I've got you," he said, more certain now, more anchored, and the dog's eyes softened just slightly, the tension in its body easing by a fraction, as if those words, simple as they were, had finally given it permission to rest, even if just for a moment longer. Daniel did not wait any longer, because waiting had never saved anyone. Not out here, not in the quiet places where time slipped through your hands without warning, and he knew that whatever strength this dog had left was already being spent just to stay present. So he moved with purpose now, controlled but urgent, sliding one arm carefully beneath the dog's chest while the other supported its hindquarters, lifting slowly, feeling the surprising lightness of the body against him, not fragile, but worn down by distance and effort. The dog did not resist, did not tense. Instead, it leaned into him with what little strength remained, its head resting against his shoulder as if it had finally reached the end of something long and unforgiving. And for a brief second, Daniel closed his eyes, grounding himself in the weight of it, in a responsibility that had just been placed in his arms without question. He stood up, adjusting his hold to keep the dog stable, and turned toward his truck, parked about 30 yards away along the gravel path, the faint outline of it barely visible under the dim glow of a distant utility light, and each step felt heavier than it should have, not because of the dog's weight, but because of what it meant, because somewhere in the back of his mind a quiet voice reminded him of another night, another carry, another promise he had not been able to keep. "Not this time," he murmured, almost without realizing it, the words slipping out like a vow rather than a thought. The wind picked up slightly, brushing against his jacket, carrying with it the distant scent of rain that had not yet arrived. and the ground shifted under his boots as he moved across uneven patches of dirt and scattered debris, careful not to jostle the dog too much, careful to keep the rhythm steady, because even the smallest disruption could feel like too much in moments like this. When he reached the truck, he opened the passenger door with one hand, guiding it wide before gently lowering the dog onto the seat, layering his own jacket beneath it to provide some warmth and support. And the dog let out a faint exhale, not a sound of pain, but something closer to release, like tension finally easing after being held too long. Daniel quickly moved around to the driver's side, starting the engine, the low rumble filling the silence as the dashboard lights flickered on, casting a soft amber glow across the interior. And he glanced over, checking, always checking, making sure the rise and fall of breath was still there, still steady enough to hold on to. His hand reached across instinctively, resting lightly against the dog's neck again. Two fingers pressing gently, as if confirming what he could already feel, that fragile rhythm, still present, still fighting. "Stay with me," he said quietly, eyes fixed ahead as he shifted the truck into drive, pulling slowly onto the narrow access road that led back toward the main highway, the tires crunching softly over gravel before finding smoother pavement. The distance to the nearest veterinary clinic was just under 12 miles, a drive he had made before without thinking. But tonight, every mile carried weight, every second measured not by the clock on the dashboard, but by the space between breaths beside him. The headlights cut through the darkness, stretching forward in an empty road, and Daniel kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting close, not gripping, not forcing, just present, a silent reassurance that the dog was no longer alone in whatever battle it had been fighting. The world outside remained unchanged, quiet, indifferent, but inside that cab something had shifted, something subtle but undeniable, like two separate stories had just intersected at exactly the point where they needed to, and neither one would leave unchanged. Daniel inhaled slowly, steadying himself, his eyes scanning the road ahead while his thoughts stayed anchored in the moment. Not the past, not the what-ifs, just this drive, this dog, this chance. And for the first time in a long while, he did not feel like he was chasing something he had lost. He felt like he was holding on to something that had found him instead. The road stretched long and empty beneath the headlights, a narrow ribbon of asphalt cutting through fields that seemed to hold their breath as the truck passed. And Daniel kept his eyes forward, focused but not detached, because part of him remained anchored to the quiet presence beside him, measuring each passing second not by distance, but by the fragile rhythm he could still feel when his hand brushed against the dog's neck. The dashboard clock ticked steadily, each minute marked in soft, digital glow, but time did not feel steady. It felt thin, like something that could slip away if he let his attention drift even for a moment. He adjusted his speed slightly, not fast enough to risk the uneven road ahead, but not slow enough to waste what little margin they might have. And the engine hummed in a low, constant tone that filled the cab like a heartbeat trying to stay in sync with another. The dog remained still, its body curled slightly against the seat, the rise and fall of its chest faint but present, and every so often there was a small shift, a subtle movement that reminded Daniel it was still there, still holding on, and each time it happened he felt a quiet surge of relief that he did not allow himself to fully acknowledge. His mind tried to pull him backward to older roads, older nights, to memories that carried the same weight but ended differently. But he resisted it, not by force, but by choice, keeping himself here in this moment because this moment was still unfinished. A flicker of light appeared ahead, distant at first, then growing slowly as he approached. The outskirts of small town, the kind that sat quietly between miles of open land, where a single gas station and a closed diner marked the edge of civilization, and beyond that, a low building with a soft green sign glowing faintly against the dark, the veterinary clinic, still open, still waiting like it had not expected anyone, but was ready all the same. Daniel turned into the gravel lot, the tires crunching softly as he brought the truck to a stop, and for a brief second he sat there, hands still on the wheel, eyes forward as if gathering something inside himself before the next step. Then he moved quickly, stepping out into the cool air, rounding the front of the truck and opening the passenger door with care. He reached in, sliding his arms beneath the dog again, lifting it gently, mindful of every small shift in weight, every change in breath, and as he held it close, he felt something different this time, not just exhaustion, but a faint response, a slight adjustment of the dog's head against his shoulder, as if it recognized that they had arrived somewhere safe. The clinic door opened with a soft chime as he pushed inside, warm lights spilling over them, carrying the clean scent of antiseptic in quiet order, and a woman behind the counter looked up immediately, her expression shifting from routine calm to focused attention in an instant. Daniel did not waste words. He did not explain or hesitate. He simply stepped forward and said, "He needs help?" His voice, steady but carrying a weight that needed no elaboration, and the woman nodded once, already moving, already calling for assistance from the back, her tone firm but composed. Daniel followed her direction, placing the dog carefully onto the examination table as instructed, his hands lingering just a second longer than necessary, not out of uncertainty, but out of connection, as if letting go too quickly might break something unseen. The room filled with quiet motion, measured, efficient, not rushed but purposeful. And Daniel stepped back only slightly, enough to give space but not enough to feel removed, his eyes fixed on the dog, watching, waiting, and somewhere beneath the tension, beneath the uncertainty, there was a small, steady thread of belief forming, not loud, not certain, but present, like a promise that had not yet been spoken aloud. The room settled into a quiet rhythm that felt both urgent and controlled, the kind of rhythm built on experience rather than panic. And Daniel stood just a step back from the table, his hands empty now, but not at rest, fingers slightly curled, as if still holding the weight that had been there moments ago. The veterinarian moved with steady precision, her voice calm as she gave instructions to the technician beside her, not rushed, not alarmed, just focused in a way that made the space feel grounded despite the uncertainty that lingered in every breath. Daniel watched closely, not try to understand every detail, but tracking the small things that mattered. The rise of the dog's chest, the subtle shifts in posture, the careful placement of hands that spoke of practice care. The overhead light cast a soft glow across the table, illuminating the worn collar again, and for a brief moment the metal tag caught the light. That same faint engraving visible, Unit 7, fallen, and Daniel felt the words settle deeper this time, not as a surprise, but as a question that had not yet been answered. "He is holding on," the veterinarian said quietly, her tone measured, not offering certainty, but not denying it either, and Daniel nodded once, more to himself than to her, because he could see it too, in the slight tension that had not completely left the dog's body, in the way its ears gave the smallest response to sound, as if some part of it was still listening, still choosing to stay. Time stretched again, but differently now, no longer slipping away, instead unfolding slowly, each second carrying the weight of possibility, and Daniel found himself standing straighter, his breathing more even, as if something inside him had aligned with the quiet determination on that table. He moved a step closer without thinking, his hand resting lightly near the edge, not touching yet, just present, and the dog's head shifted slightly, just enough to notice, just enough to confirm that it was aware, and that small movement carried more meaning than anything spoken in the room. "Easy," Daniel murmured, his voice low, steady, the same tone he had used earlier, the same tone that first met those eyes in the dark. And there was again that subtle response, not a full movement, not strength but recognition, a connection that held even here under bright lights and careful hands. The technician adjusted something quietly. The veterinarian paused for a brief second, watching, listening, and then gave a small nod, the kind that did not celebrate yet, but acknowledged a shift, something moving in the right direction, something choosing not to let go. Daniel exhaled slowly, a breath he had not realized he was holding, and in that breath there was a release, not of tension, but of doubt, because for the first time since he had seen that shape in the darkness, he allowed himself to believe that this was not just an ending delayed. This was something turning, something fragile but real. He reached out then, just enough to let his fingers rest gently against the dog's neck again. Careful not to interfere, just to be there, and the warmth he felt was steady, not strong, not certain, but steady enough to hold on to. The room remained quiet. The work continued, but something had changed in the space. Between them, something unseen but undeniable, like a line had been crossed from uncertainty into possibility, and Daniel stayed right there, unmoving, present, because some moments are not meant to be rushed. They are meant to be witnessed, and this was one of them. The quiet in the room deepened, not because the work had stopped, but because something unseen had begun to settle, like a storm that had decided, for now, to pass without breaking, and Daniel remained where he stood, his hand still resting lightly against the dog's neck, feeling that fragile rhythm continue beneath his fingertips, steady enough to believe in, but delicate enough to never take for granted. The veterinarian stepped back slightly, her eyes scanning the small signs that mattered, the kind most people would miss, and after a moment she let out a slow breath, not of relief, but of cautious approval, the kind that comes when something chooses to stay rather than fade. "He is responding," she said quietly, and though the words were simple, they carried weight, the kind that settled into Daniel's chest and stayed there, grounding him in a way he had not felt in a long time. He nodded once, his gaze never leaving the dog, because he could see it too, in the subtle shift of the ears, in the way the body no longer seemed to be slipping away, but instead holding its place, inch by inch reclaiming something it had almost lost. The room carried the soft sounds of movement, measured and intentional, but Daniel's focus narrowed, not to the activity around him, but to the presence in front of him. And as he stood there, something began to surface from deeper within, not a sharp memory, not something that demanded attention, but a quiet echo of a moment he had buried beneath years of distance. It was not this room, not this dog, but it felt the same stillness, the same fragile line between holding on and letting go. And he remembered how it had ended, how he had stood there before with empty hands and words that came too late, and for a brief second his jaw tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of that memory, trying to return. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself, refusing to let the past take hold of the present. Because this was different, this moment had not been decided yet, and he would not let it be shaped by something that had already been lost. The dog shifted again, a small movement, but stronger than before, its head lifting just slightly from the table before settling back down. And Daniel felt it clearly now, not just survival, but effort, the kind that comes from within, the kind that cannot be forced or given, only chosen. "That is it," he murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper, but steady, the same tone he had carried through every moment since the darkness. Outside, and the dog responded again, not with sound, but with presence, a quiet acknowledgement that it was still there, still listening, still connected. The veterinarian glanced toward him briefly, noting the exchange without interrupting it, because some things could not be measured by instruments or explained in clinical terms. They existed in the space between trust and will, and right now, that space was holding. Daniel's hand remained where it was, not gripping, not guiding, just there, a point of contact, a reminder that the dog was not alone in whatever fight it had chosen to continue. And as the seconds passed, the room no longer felt like a place of uncertainty. It felt like a place of waiting, the kind of waiting that comes before something changes, something quiet, something real. Daniel exhaled slowly again, his shoulders easing just enough to allow a different feeling to take root. Not relief, not yet, but something close, something that had been absent for a long time, something that felt like the beginning of trust returning, not just from the dog, but from himself. And he stayed there, unmoving, present, because for the first time in a long while, he was not trying to fix what had been broken. He was simply choosing not to walk away from what still had a chance to be saved. The hours did not pass in a straight line. They unfolded slowly, measured not by clocks, but by small changes that only someone paying close attention would notice. And Daniel stayed through all of it, long after the initial urgency had softened in a quiet observation, long after the clinic had settled into that late-night stillness where footsteps were softer and voices dropped without being asked. He sat now in a chair, pulled close to the table, elbows resting lightly on his knees, hands loosely clasped, his posture no longer rigid but not fully relaxed either, as if part of him remained on watch, unwilling to step away even when there was no immediate threat to face. The dog lay still but different now, not fading, not slipping, but resting, the rise and fall of its chest more consistent, more certain, and every so often there was a small movement, a shift of the head, a twitch of the ear, subtle signs that spoke louder than any words in that quiet room. Daniel noticed all of it, every detail, every change, because he had learned long ago that survival did not announce itself loudly. It arrived in moments like these, quiet, almost easy to miss if you were not looking closely enough. The veterinarian returned after some time, her steps unhurried, her expression calm, and she paused beside him, looking at the dog for a moment before speaking. "He is stabilizing," she said, her voice low but certain in a way it had not been before. And Daniel nodded slowly, letting the words settle in, not rushing to feel relief, but allowing something steadier to take its place. "He has been through a lot," she added, glancing briefly at the worn collar, at the faint engraving that still carried meaning even in its faded state. And Daniel followed her gaze, his jaw tightening just slightly, not in tension, but in recognition of a story that had not yet been told. "Unit 7, he said quietly, almost to himself, and the veterinarian gave a small nod, understanding without needing explanation, because some names carried weight beyond what could be easily spoken. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes returning to the dog, and for a moment he allowed himself to see more than just the present, to imagine what this animal had been before this night, the training, the discipline, the partnership it must have known, the purpose that had shaped it into something more than just a survivor. And that thought settled deep, not as a question, but as a connection that felt both unexpected and undeniable. The dog stirred again, a little stronger this time, its head lifting just enough to shift position before settling back down, and Daniel leaned forward instinctively, his hand reaching out, resting gently against the side of its neck once more. And this time the response was clearer. The dog's eyes opened briefly, not fully, but enough to meet his, enough to acknowledge that he was still there. It was a small moment, easy to overlook, but Daniel felt it fully, the recognition, the quiet trust that had carried from the darkness outside into this room, unbroken despite everything in between. "You are not done yet," he said softly, not as a command, not as a plea, but as a statement, something simple and grounded. And the dog's gaze lingered for a second longer before its eyes closed again, not in weakness, but in rest. The room remained still, the night deepening beyond the walls. But something had shifted again, something more solid now, like the uncertain line they had been standing on had moved just enough to become ground beneath their feet. And Daniel sat there, steady, present, no longer waiting for something to be taken from him, but watching as something, slowly and quietly, was being given back. Morning did not arrive all at once. It eased its way in through the narrow clinic windows, a soft gray light replacing the heavy darkness of night, and Daniel had not noticed when the hours shifted, only that the silence around him had changed, becoming lighter, less burdened, as if the world itself had decided to breathe a little easier. He was still there, in the same chair, though his posture had softened, one arm resting along the edge of the table, his hand close enough to feel the warmth that had remained steady through the night. And when he looked down now, he saw something different, something he had been waiting for without realizing it. The dog was no longer just holding on, it was resting with intention, its breathing deeper, more even, no longer fighting every second, but beginning to trust the stillness around it. The veterinarian stepped in quietly, her presence calm and unhurried, and she gave a small, knowing nod when she saw him still there, as if she had expected nothing less. And she moved closer to the table, checking gently, observing without disrupting, before turning slightly toward Daniel. "He made it through the night," she said, her voice carrying a quiet certainty that settled into the room like a promise fulfilled. Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath long and steady, and for the first time since the night began, he allowed his shoulders to drop, not in exhaustion, but in release, the kind that comes when something uncertain becomes real. He looked back at the dog, studying the subtle changes, the way its body no longer seemed weighed down by invisible strain, the way its ears rested naturally instead of tense and searching. And then, as if sensing his attention, the dog stirred, its head shifting slightly before lifting just a fraction, enough to break the stillness, enough to meet him halfway. Its eyes opened, clearer now, focused, and they found him again, just as they had in the darkness hours before. But this time there was no urgency in them, no silent plea, only recognition, calm and steady, like it knew exactly where it was and exactly who stood beside it. Daniel leaned forward, his hand moving instinctively to rest along the side of the dog's neck, and this time the response came with strength, a small but certain lean into his touch, a quiet confirmation that the connection between them had not only held, it had grown. "You stayed," Daniel said softly, not as a question, not even as a statement, but as an acknowledgement of something shared, something earned in the space between survival and trust. The veterinarian watched the moment without interrupting, her expression gentle, because some recoveries were not just physical, they were something deeper, something that unfolded quietly between two lives that had crossed at exactly the right moment. Outside, the first light of day spread across the horizon, unseen but present, and inside that small room, something just as quiet had taken shape, not dramatic, not loud, but lasting, the kind of change that does not announce itself. It simply remains steady and undeniable. And Daniel stayed right there, not because he had to, but because leaving was no longer something that made sense, not when something worth holding on to had finally found its way back to him. The sun had fully risen by the time Daniel stepped outside, the lights stretching across the quiet town in soft gold, warming the edges of buildings and settling gently over the empty road. And for a moment he just stood there, breathing in the cool morning air as if it carried something new with it, something he had not felt in a long time. Behind him, through the glass door, the clinic remained calm, steady, holding the quiet aftermath of a long night that had not broken, and inside that stillness, a life continued, not loudly, not dramatically, but with quiet certainty. Daniel rested his hands at his sides, his shoulders no longer tight, no longer carrying the weight he had brought in with him hours before, and as he looked out across the open stretch of land beyond the parking lot, he realized something had shifted in a way he could not fully explain, something that did not need words to make sense. The door behind him opened softly, and he turned just enough to see the veterinarian step out, her expression calm but warmer now, and she gave a small nod, the kind that carried meaning without needing to be spoken. "He is going to need time," she said gently, "but he is strong." And Daniel nodded once, accepting it not as information, but as truth, something he had already begun to understand. He glanced back through the glass, just for a second, and though he could not see the dog from where he stood, he felt its presence there, steady, alive, and that was enough. "I will come back," he said quietly, more to himself than to her, but she heard it and gave a faint smile, recognizing the tone, the certainty in it, the way. It was not a decision being made, but something already decided. Daniel turned then, walking slowly toward his truck, each step grounded, unhurried, as if the need to rush had left him somewhere in the dark hours before, and when he reached the door he paused, his hand resting against the handle, his reflection faint in the glass, older than he remembered, but different now, not worn down, not distant, just present. He opened the door and sat inside, the familiar space no longer feeling empty. And as the engine started, the low hum filled the silence again. But this time it did not feel like something to hold on to. It felt like something to move forward with. He pulled out of the gravel lot, the tires rolling onto the open road, the morning lights stretching ahead of him. And for a while he drove without thinking, without replaying the night, without trying to understand every detail. Because some moments were not meant to be taken apart, they were meant to be carried. Miles passed. Quietly, the landscape unfolding in steady rhythm, and Daniel found his grip on the wheel loosening just slightly. Not from fatigue, but from something easing inside him, something that had been tight for too long finally letting go. And somewhere behind him, in a quiet room filled with soft light and steady hands, a German shepherd rested, not alone, not forgotten, but exactly where it needed to be, held between the memory of where it had come from and the possibility of where it might go next. Daniel kept driving, the road stretching forward, and for the first time in a long while, he was not chasing what had been lost. He was moving towards something that had chosen to stay, and that, more than anything, was enough. In this deeply emotional, cinematic journey, a wounded K9 finds the strength to crawl through darkness until it reaches a U.S. Marine, forming a silent bond that speaks louder than words and reveals the quiet power behind the most unforgettable animal stories. Set against a lonely stretch of land and a small-town veterinary clinic, the story unfolds through moments of trust, resilience, and unspoken understanding, where a soldier carrying unseen scars is forced to confront his past while choosing not to walk away from a life that refuses to give up. Through careful pacing and rich sensory detail, this narrative captures the essence of animal stories that are not just about survival, but about connection, healing, and the kind of loyalty that cannot be trained or explained. As the K9 begins to respond and the Marine remains by his side through the longest night, the story explores themes of redemption and second chances, echoing the emotional depth that defines the most powerful animal stories found in modern storytelling. The presence of a worn military tag hints at a deeper past, adding layers of mystery and emotional gravity that elevate this beyond simple rescue, transforming it into one of those rare animal stories where both human and animal are changed forever. By morning, as light replaces darkness, what remains is not just recovery, but a quiet miracle shaped by patience, compassion, and the refusal to give up on another soul, reinforcing why animal stories like this continue to resonate so deeply with audiences who believe in hope, faith, and the unseen, bonds that guide us. This story stands as a reminder that sometimes healing does not come through grand actions, but through presence, trust, and the smallest acts of care, making it one of those timeless animal stories that linger long after the final moment fades. Character 1. A 34-year-old white male U.S. Marine, rugged face with light scars, short military haircut, wearing worn tactical uniform and boots, calm intense expression, front-facing portrait, cinematic lighting, realistic texture, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. Character 2. A 6-year-old German Shepherd, full body visible, strong lean build, sable black and tan coat, alert ears, amber eyes, realistic fur detail, standing pose, cinematic lighting, front-facing view, no cartoon. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration.